Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Kant. His concern, so the podcast talks about Kant's concern with the type of critter we are, or creature, and what that does to the limits of our knowledge, right? So there are things that we can't know, according to Kant. All right? We can't know about the existence of God or whether we have free will, for instance. Right? And Kant thinks these are true, right? He believes them. But he also claims like we don't know and we can't know whether or not God exists or whether or not we have free will. It's not just that we don't have enough time or we don't have enough resources or we don't have good enough arguments. So we like literally, because of the type of creature we are, couldn't know. Like we have certain limitations. But he's not bothered by this because he distinguishes between superstition and faith. Right? Where, faith is belief in something that you can't prove to be true, right? You couldn't know it. That's this. That's Kant's belief in God. That's Kant's belief in free will. That's taken on faith. And it's not crazy to do that, right? Because you couldn't know. It can't be held against you. Whereas superstition is believing in something without adequate evidence, and you could know. So the example in the podcast is about religious sacrifice. Gives a controversial example and just say like, all right, whether or not I believe in the shift of the tectonic plates could be a matter of superstition if I believe that there's continental drift and there's no evidence for it. If I'm like, I just occasionally feel the earth move, so the plates are drifting. All right, yeah, that's what causes earthquakes, but I don't have evidence for that. It's a superstition, right? Throwing salt over your shoulder, being scared of black cats. Miners used to, on their way to work in the deep south, if they saw a woman, they would think that's bad luck. They'd have to go home, right? Those are superstitions of evidence for it, but you could. Whereas these things are faith. So Kant's not bothered by not being able to prove things to be true if they're the sort of thing that are a matter of faith. Now, I want to situate this in context of what we've been discussing because we're talking about epistemology right now. And this has to do with a belief about what we can know, how we know. Descartes calls this first philosophy. A lot of philosophers during his time, a lot of contemporary philosophers also called it first philosophy. You begin with methodology and you try to pin down principles and beliefs that give you a metaphysics and an ontology, right? And there are a couple ways you could carve this space up, right? So you could do a rationalist versus an empiricist distinction. Now this is an anachronism. What does that mean? Well, it is something that contemporary readers, so you and I and other experts, have read into this time period. They would not have necessarily used these distinctions, although the general contours of these distinctions might be real. This is just a way for us to conceptualize the debate. So rationalists think that it's our innate natures and faculties that allow us, these God-given innate natures and faculties that allow us to nail down beliefs that we can then use to justify knowledge about the external world. Whereas empiricists think that we don't have to go through that mediation. We get to just have sensory inputs and then those ground beliefs about the external world. They're very materialistic, right? So a lot of these guys are metaphysically starting in a different place than the rationalist, right? Different commitments. So Descartes, for instance, is a rationalist, right? Remember, he thinks that a couple of innate beliefs and our nature as a thinking thing, we can ground, those are basic, like foundational beliefs that ground claims about the external world, right? Whereas he had interlocutors, people that disagree with him, like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who rejected, in some sense, this rationalist approach and just thought, no, we actually have sensory inputs and that's what allows us to have knowledge about the external world. Hobbes and Locke are also well known in political circles. Locke, in particular, wrote a lot of colonial constitutions and charters. So these guys got around. But they're famous contemporary critics of Descartes. Contemporary as in they were contemporaries of Descartes. They're all modern authors, but they went after Descartes hard. So notice here that this debate is about how we justify knowledge of the external world, or how we get it. And it's not a debate about, access to the external world, right? It's just more about how do we respond to skeptical worries. Whereas you could, talk about, given our nature, what is our access to the external world? And you could phrase it like this, right? Do physical objects and their properties exist independently of our perception of them, right? You can ask this question. And if you got a couple of ways you can answer. You can be a realist, you can be an idealist, you can be a phenomenalist, which is a type of idealist, maybe. So what's the distinction? Okay, well, a realist is going to answer yes to this question. Do physical objects and their properties exist independently of our perception of them? And they answer yes, realists do. Idealists say no, right? And they have a particular explanation for why that's the case, whereas phenomenalists also say no. So phenomenalists think that physical objects are only known through the senses and are not real in of themselves. And then this distinction here is kind of thin, this distinction between idealist and phenomenalist, but I'm going to keep using it for now. You could be a transcendental idealist, right? And that's Kant. Okay, Kant's a transcendental idealist. And he says, no, right? Space and time are features of how we perceive objects. They're not things that exist independently of us, which is different than what the phenomenalist claims, right? The phenomenalist is saying, like, no, we don't. We only know physical objects through the senses, and they're not real in of themselves. Now, what is that distinction? Like real in and of themselves, and that just means that they have mind-independent properties, right? They exist independently of our perception of them. That's all in and of themselves means, right? That is, when we're not perceiving them, those properties persist. That physical object persists. So a really famous phenomenalist is Berkeley, of which the famous Berkeley in California is named after. We just pronounce his name funny in the United States, but it's Berkeley. And he, if you were looking at an object, it exists. When you're not looking at it, it ceases to exist, at least in that way. So you're thinking, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. How do things I'm not looking at continue to persist, right? And he's like, oh, well, because God's watching, right? So Berkeley is a phenomenalist. And Kant's going to disagree with both the realist and the phenomenalist, right? And keep in mind, if you wanted to be hard and fast on this, Descartes may not be a realist. Just depends on your perception of them. Whereas Hobbes and Locke probably are realists. We haven't read them, but there's an idea called naive realism, for instance, which is that our perception of physical objects is true, right? Vertical, vertical. So the inputs match our appearances, right? So realism is sort of the common sense sort of view that a lot of people have. So what Kant does as a transcendental idealist is to deny that objects in space and time exist independently of us, right? Appearances exist partly through our experiences, right? So you have the objects, you have the appearances, right? Appearances. We get appearances, not the objects. And their existence in time and space is a mere appearance. Right? So keep in mind, what Kant is denying here is the existence of time and space, not the objects themselves. Right? That's a key distinction. And I'm going to make a second video where I break this down in a little bit more detail.